Ok. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Bienvenue dans cette nouvelle série de webinaires que nous organisons dans le cadre de
webinars that we are organizing in the framework of ICO. Today we are going to share experiences with cats on islands. We have a couple of experts with us in order to understand the framework of this webinar. So we are still in the framework of ICO, Île Côté Océan. Collectively with researchers, we are trying to understand the problems and work together to understand methods. Today, the webinar that we are introducing has been organized by 3 institutions. One institution I am part of, so the initiatives of Petites Îles de la Méditerranée and SMILO together with Conservatoire du littoral. So we are going to start with the first episode of a series of 3 episodes dedicated to managing cats on small islands. Our objective is to help them, and we have the chance to have a couple of experts who are extremely experienced and will present their experiences or reflections on the subject. So this is the first episode today, and it's about preventing the introduction of cats on small islands and identifying which action strategy to implement. So next Tuesday, 18th of April, we are going to talk about soft techniques to limit and control cats populations. And then the 3rd episode on April 25th will be about the eradication as last resort and the questions around it. I would like to thank the people who have spent their time organizing. Cyrielle, today she is behind the question box. Enora, who has organized, and Isabella, the interpreter for today, will translating from English into French and vice versa. So if you wish to listen to the translation, you can, we're going to have to completely master the Zoom techniques to listen to translation, so you can see instructions on your slide to listen to the translation in English and French. Questions today? So the questions will be addressed in the Q&A session at the end of today's workshop. And then there will be space to ask those questions at the end of the seminar. And if we have enough time, we will have extra time to share our experiences. So please do write all of your questions on the chat, and then we will ask them live at the end. So I would also like to remind speakers that you are recorded, and the seminar will be on our YouTube channel. And please don't keep your microphone on. So the main part today is preventing the introduction of cats on small islands and understanding why we need to do this. I know that the participants to today's webinar are already informed. Why do we need to do this? This was going to be our introduction part. The part 1 will be on how to prevent cat arrival on islands by Elsa Bonnaud. Then we're going to have a small question and answer session, 10-15 minutes. And then we will have part 2 of today's webinar with Elizabeth Bell, who is going to talk for 10 minutes about her experience on what is the best strategy to put in place. What is her strategy that she has put in place in her experience? And then we're going to have again a Q&A session of 10-15 minutes. So I've already introduced Elsa and Elizabeth. So I'm going to leave them introduce themselves individually. And so I will give the floor to Elizabeth first. And I would like to really thank you on behalf of everyone, because today she's on the southern island of New Zealand, Biswell, and now it's 2 o'clock in the morning. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. So thank you, Elizabeth, for connecting at this ungodly hour. So please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's great to be here. Yes, it is very early in New Zealand. It's 2 in the morning, but it's fantastic to be part of this. So I'm the Managing Director of Wildlife Management International. We are an island restoration and ecological research consultancy based in New Zealand. We have a core staff of about 12 people and a number of associates with us. And over the past 30 years, we've completed a number of feasibility assessments, control and eradication operations, biosecurity strategies on islands, particularly around invasive species, and a lot including cats. We also do a lot of endangered species research, including translocations of rare species back to islands once predators have been removed. And we advise on a lot of operations across the world, often being on technical advisory groups. So we're really pleased to be here and look forward to this discussion.
Thank you, merci beaucoup. Just one last question. Why do
thank you.
Small birds on this picture?
So this is a black petrel. It's one of the long-term studies we have done. It's a Procellaria parkinsoni. We've been studying these birds for 27 years on one of our key islands.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais passer la parole maintenant à Elsa Bonnaud qui va se présenter.
Now I will give the floor to Elsa, who is going to introduce herself. And I will disappear. Elsa, the floor is yours.
Thanks for inviting me.
Merci.
Really interesting discussion. I did my PhD on Porco Island some years ago, 15 or 18 years ago now. And now I'm working in Paris University. And I still work on impact of predator, but on both insular ecosystem and now peri-urban area. But I'm still focused on predator-prey interaction. So I'm a classical assistant professor with PhD student, postdoc, and responsible of some teaching units. And yes, I'm in the kind of scientific expert for the PIM Initiative. So let's start. And if you have some question with my curriculum, we can talk about that after that. So yes, the question today, I think it's why it's necessary to manage cats on islands. So next slide. Just a brief introduction. As already you know more or less all that we are facing a global species extinction worldwide. So I put some slides to really focus on this subject, the global extinction, that they are really accelerating the previous centuries. You can pass the next slide. And this extinction have occurred more on island than in other biological region, as you know, because island have simplified trophic webs, more loss of naive species, vacant niche, etc., etc. So more or less 80% of the extinction have occurred and occurred still on island. So it's really the ecosystem where we have still to work, and we have to prioritize all the management thing, and all the, how can I say that, the management option, etc. So next slide, please. So I put there a slide to explain that, yes, regarding specifically the island species and the extinct island species, that the biological invasion, we know we have plenty of data on that now, that they are the main cause of species extirpation or biological invasion. Then biological invasion, as you can see on this graph, is a mixed with also wildlife exploitation and also cultivation area, etc. But the main, really the main cause is biological invasion. So I put a slide there to explain that among this biological invasion, the predator mammal species is really a main invasive species that's threatening seabird, for example. But we are going to see that more. It's not only a question of seabird; it's it's also all the naive and native species on island. So on this slide, you can see specifically for seabirds that yes, the cats, rats, and mice are really the main mammal species that threaten seabirds. And what is interesting, it's why I put this slide here, is that even in scope, the proportion of the total population affected, and in case of severities, it's the paper that you already know maybe of Diaz a few years ago, that both severity and scope for the population of the seabird, it's really, really important. And the most species that threaten the seabird are the rodent and the cats. And why? The main processes, the main ecological process is that there's none historically present on this island, the cats, the rodents, etc., all the mammal predator, and there is no co-evolution process with the native island species. So mainly for seabirds, but it's not only a seabird question. Next slide, please. And particularly for cats, the domestic cats were really largely disseminated on island because he was domesticated very early, really early. The most ancient evidence of its domestication appeared nearly 10,000 years ago on Cyprus Island. They found the skeleton on of the cats really buried near a human skeleton. And up next, please. And so the domestication occurred really early, and cats have a great ability to catch rodent. So they were introduced to control the rodent population that have been already introduced on island. Next, please. And so the cats were introduced on island, so they prey on rodent. It's true that it can regulate the previously introduced rodent population, but also they preyed on all the naive and native species on island. And it's not only a seabird species that, as I said before, it has responsibilities, and a part or total responsibilities of the extinction of numerous reptile, mammals, seabirds, and landbird species also on island. Next, please. So, Elizabeth, if you want to add on the cat status, we share the introduction.
Yes, thank you. So this is just a little bit of an explanation of what we mean by the different categories of cats. So starting with a pet cat or a domestic cat, this is one that lives in someone's home, is completely supported by humans. It's for its, it relies on humans for its food, for its comfort, for its housing, and that. Then, of course, you've got a stray cat. This is an intermediary status of cat where it used to be homed, but for some reason has lost its family, lost its place of dwelling with people. So it has been associated with people throughout its life until it's come outside. This stage can be rehomed back to its family, its human family, but it also can revert to becoming feral if it remains in the wild for a long time. And a feral cat has never been associated with people. It's often aggressive when it's outside, and it actively avoids people. So it usually runs away if it sees people or remains hidden, and they survive completely on their own outdoors. Back to you, Elsa.
So, Fabrice, did I go straight for the part one, or do we?
Yes, please, directly. We will have questions at the end of the part one. Please, go ahead.
Okay, so to answer to the question how to prevent cats' arrival on island, I give some clues that we already experience. So they really, I think the main cues is still to inform people, inform manager, inform scientists, inform every people that they can have an access to island or an access to this particular ecosystem. So to inform specifically on cat impact on island, because as we said just previously, and you can see that on this slide, the silhouette, I don't remember how to say that in English, of the cats, the first, then the second is the rotten, the third one is dogs. You can see the legend just there. So you can see on this slide that really the cats are the main responsible of the number of extant it's in red, and threatened species on island. So it's really one of the major mammalian predator and introduced predator on island that affect all the system of the ecosystem of island, the species assemblage, etc. So I think we really need to inform on the impact, that it's not a nice cat, domestic cat that we know, etc. It's really a predator that is really able to hunt and to hunt independently of the hunger. That's important. So next slide, please. And it's not only a question of direct predation, it's only really different mechanisms and ecological process and different mechanisms of predator-prey mechanism and non-predator-prey mechanisms. So we have all the trophic link with direct predation. They can impact population size and dynamic, species assemblage, etc. But also you can have behavioral change of the prey with different behavior, change in behavior of the different prey that they can hunt, or they can, how can I say that, they can stress, and they can change really the reproductive success of the reproductive behavior. So I have just two examples for this slide. Dynamics of seabird, not with the question of predation, but still in limiting or preventing their settlements. Or, for example, you can have a different change in some ecological process, like seed dispersal, for example. You have a famous example on Canary Island where the cats eat. You have some change in the ecological process. This is, for example, the change in seed dispersal, where cats ate the biggest lizards that disperse the biggest seeds. And so if there are no more big lizards, it can change really the dispersal process of all the seeds, etc. So it's just to keep in mind that it's not only a predation question and not only extinction, a matter of extinction of species, but it's only really a disturbance of all ecological process that can appear on island. So next slide, please. So yes, it's still to inform specifically, so why its impact is so detrimental. It's to inform specifically on biological trait of cats. Its success is really due to its strong capacity to disperse and adapt. He has a multi-partner reproduction and high fecundity, so he's really a very nice invasive species because it's really efficient. And is an efficient also predator that hunts, what I said before, independently of the hunger. And it can prey really on a large range of vertebrate and invertebrate species. So is really a kind of super introduced predator that they can become a super invasive predator. Just next animation. So all these reasons lead that to a really, really high success for establishing new and numerous cat population. That's really a key issue, that when cats arrive on island, it has a great chance to have a great success for establishing new population. This one. Like, and as we said before, it's because there are no coevolution process, so we can pass this thing. So for me and for many other scientists and managers, etc., really the most important thing for us is to turn off the faucet rather than mop up the leak. I think it's a kind of great image, really important, that instead of just say, oh yes, we have to manage the cat, we have to prevent their arrival. So I think there are clear rules to follow. For me, the three main rules is that there are no new domestic cats that can enter or go to an island without being nurturing. To sterilize all the domestic cats if it's an inhabited island, that some inhabitants have some domestic cats, and all the removal of feral cats. It's the third episode, and we have many different techniques of cat trapping, hunting, etc. And just to finish, it's important also, I think, to me, to promote that the domestic cat that are on island and the nurtured domestic cat on island, it's one of the key of the success to limit the cat impact on island. So it's a promotion that we did when I did my PhD on Porphyro Island, that we named all the domestic cat that has an owner in the island, personal owner, and we named with their name, and we made a kind of trombinoscope, I don't know if the name is okay, to know which cats belong to which owner, and with her name, with their name, and to inform that these cats are nurtured, and it's not a big deal with the biodiversity process, all the ecological process, etc. That if there are no more new arrival, we can perfectly manage the domestic cat on island. That is, I think.
Yes, merci beaucoup Elsa, c'était très clair.
So thank you, Elsa. This was very clear. So now we're going to go to the questions, and I'm going to leave the floor to Cyrielle, who is managing the questions and answer. I already have a question, because we've seen very clearly scientific data. Can we also sensitize the public? You know, we can't just say, oh, the cats are not very nice. You know, we have to do a campaign of awareness to prevent the arrival of cats. Well, this is often not enough, but it is certainly a very important part of my experience. And, you know, I'm only sharing my experience today. When we have worked with the cat population on islands, it's very important to have public meeting and explain publicly that this is not a war against the cats or to defend reptiles or rodents, but to you know, keep biodiversity instead of losing biodiversity, respecting the ecological processes of the island, and to really contain the risks of extinction. So it's very important, of course, to talk about this. I've met many people, and you know, for example, I had created a map of France with all the McDonald's, and I explained that the cats are just a McDonald's, just like the McDonald's. You know, you can have some McDonald's, but you can't have only McDonald's all over the territory. So that was a very clear image, so that people are aware that the cat is a very efficient predator and reproduces really well. So we need to manage it. We cannot just stay still and do nothing, because we need to respect the ecological process of the island. And so it's not a war against the cats and on behalf of birds and reptiles and rodents, but it's just about preserving the richness and the ecological processes and systems of the island. That's you know, that it's not a war between animals. That's must be very clear. So against the McDonaldization of the islands. Okay. So are there any other questions? So good morning, good afternoon, sorry, everyone. So there is a question, what is the negative impact of domestic cats compared to other types of cats? Well, this is very easy, because the different cats have different statuses, but they are the same species, Felix cactus. So it is indeed the same species. And if they are feral or stray or domestic, they never lose their capacity of predators. So they can still go and chase prey, and this can still be a problem for biodiversity. If they are sterilized, they don't tend to be hunters, they don't tend to go very far, because this is certainly a behavior connected to not being sterilized. But if they are not sterilized, then they still are predators, and they are also feeding genetically the populations of errant et aurais, so the stray and the feral cats. What are the relations between cats and rodents, and the impact of elimination of predators on the rodents and the birds? This is a very good question. Well, we've seen with other researchers that if there are cats and rats, the ideal thing is to eliminate both species, eradication of both species. That's the best option because they are both in very invasive species. Because sometimes it's easier to eliminate cats. It depends on the objectives of the management. Also, predation on adults is very, very detrimental. So cats are hunting adults, and this creates a strong slowdown of the rodent population. And, you know, when they chase birds, it's less serious. And there's also a problem when they actually hunt young ones of the different species. Donc, the most important thing is really trying to reduce not only the invasive species, but also the rodents. And the problem is, for example, we've seen that cats were more detrimental to seabirds than to rats. So, of course, we have to follow all the different populations of prey and predators. Thank you. And there is another question on the presentation of Elizabeth, but maybe we will answer to this question, but I will ask it anyways. We're talking about withdrawing, eliminating feral and stray cats. But where do we put them? Where do they go? So what we did at Portco, we trapped them with some traps that were fairly easy to use, and all these cats went to the vet, and half of them had euthanasia because they were ill, and the other ones were sterilized, which was very important, and then they have been adopted by families. And the cats that we have taken from the islands were adopted really easily because they have a label that they come from national parks. So this is what happens. We try to eliminate cats from island without killing them. This can work really well on a certain scale. But of course, cats who are not on the island are less detrimental, but this is what we're trying to do. We trap them, we have to give euthanasia to the sick ones, and the other ones get adopted. Okay, so for now, the questions are finished. I think there is one last question.
Avec vise de stratégie, de manière à mieux comprendre effectivement par rapport à tous ces enjeux qu'on a maintenant.
It's part of strategy, so that's what we're going to do now. We're going to talk about strategy and risks involved, and especially which strategy to put in place given the context. So how to choose your strategy. This is a title of part 2 by Elizabeth Bell. And also, we're going to talk about the different territories. So, Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
So, yes, I'm going to talk about how to address the situation of cats on inhabited islands and how to do your strategy. So, next slide. So, the key thing is when you're preparing for either a control or an eradication project on an island, you basically assess the feasibility of your operation, and it involves asking a lot of questions. And this is particularly important on an island with communities, because they'll have a lot of opinions and misunderstandings about what you're trying to do. So it's really important to understand what's going to impact on any type of operation you're doing. And the first thing, of course, is what your island is like. So you've got to look at things like terrain and weather, the number of people that live there, the number of visitors you have, but importantly, what target and non-target species you have. So what species you're going to target in your control or eradication operation, which could include cats, but also thinking about what happens if you remove cats, if you have rodents present, or large ungulates like deer or goats, but also how to protect the non-target species from the operation as well. So if you've got, native mammals, or important birds, or lizards, or other reptiles. During this period, you also complete trials, testing the tools, introducing the different types of tools to the community, and importantly, undertake some baseline monitoring to understand what's going to happen when you do your control program. It's also important to understand what your island community is like. How many people are there? How many numbers of settlements if you've got a very large island and there's lots of different housing complexes in different places? What type of houses? Is it just single houses? Is it big apartments? Is it industries? Has it got lots of businesses? Is there lots of farms? Is there lots of restaurants? Is there different, all of these things impact on how much waste is produced, what sort of visitors are needed, and how to approach all those people. And then it's having conversations with that community about how many pet cats they've got. So part of this Elsa's talked about, it's creating an understanding of who owns which cat, what are their names, what do they look like? Do they think there are stray cats? Have people lost their pet cats and are quite keen to get them back? Have cats been tested for various diseases, and how that would impact on both the feral population and the local population if you were thinking about bringing in a disease? How many cats are microchipped, and how many are spayed and neutered? And also conversations with people about what do their pets do across the island and where do they go? Next slide, please. And then it's also introducing and looking at what are your possible techniques for eradication and control. And it's talking to the community about all of these options and how they feel about these. There's lots of different types of traps, and these are both live traps and kill traps. There's shooting, there's hunting, there's the introduction of viral diseases, and it's the use of toxins. And it's to talk with the community about how they feel about all of those options and what is their preferred methods. And it's also key to understand what the monitoring options are like. Are you going to use cameras? Are you going to use detection dogs? And what other options are available, and how will that impact on the community and their pet cats? And then, of course, it's also checking about the legislation. Do you have to have special licenses to do some types of those eradication options? Are you allowed to use a toxin? Are you allowed to use a viral disease introduction? And if you are, what sort of approvals and permits are needed for that, both officially through the legislative branches of government, but also socially with your community? What do they want? And there's also things like you need to make sure there's a risk assessment. And this is both for your human population, your non-target population, the environmental impacts, and also those really important domestic cats. And then there's the health and safety for your team, but also a whole range of other legislative approvals that you must make sure are obtained. Next slide. The most important thing on an inhabited island is that consultation with the community. Everybody loves their pet cats, and of course, the key part of an operation like this is you do not want to harm somebody's pet or any other non-target species. So one key part is interviewing all of the residents and asking if they have a pet cat or of a lost pet cat that's turned stray, and create a catalogue. So basically, like Elsa's slide, you find out their names, you take a picture of them, and you then understand how many are resident in there on the island. We also undertake some GPS tracking of pet cats, and this is to help determine how far they roam and where they could be at risk of any control or eradication operation. It can also mean you can adapt your eradication or control program by using live trapping in one area of your island where cats and pet cats in particular are active, but use kill traps in other areas that are not used by pet cats, which means you can target feral cats much more quickly. It's also important to understand how many feral cats you actually have. It may turn out that most of the cats you have on the island are classed as stray by the community, and they will want some of those back. So that may affect how you end up trapping or using what technique you have. So it's really important to use a range of monitoring tools, including trail cameras, to understand where those cats are and how many they are and how far they roam. And a key part of the conversation is to talk about the responsible ownership of pet cats to the community. And the 5 key things for responsible pet ownership is diet, so making sure your cat is well fed and is well fed with the right products, particularly a lot of meat in their diet so that they're happy and they're not wanting to go out and hunt other things. There's a lot of play and socialization with your cats, that they wear collars, and there's a range of different type of collars. This helps them keep identified, but also that it can help prevent them attacking other animals. That they're kept indoors, at a minimum kept indoors at night, but in some cases kept indoors or use what they call catios, a little enclosed area that they can go outside when they want to, but that they're not going to roam very far. And the all-important spaying and neutering your cat and making sure it's microchipped. So those are the key things to explain to the community that will really help protect their pet cats and give the cat a really good life. Next slide, please. There are a range of options that are discussed for control or eradication options, and each stage and each type, each option has different connotations and implications for the project. So there's the trap, neuter and return, or trap, neuter, release, or trap, neuter, rehome option. But the problem with this one is there are a number of implications, of course, if this is chosen. And this is really important to explain to the community. There are significant ecological implications because, of course, if you spay and neuter an animal and then release it, it's still going to predate on animals across the island. They live for at least 5 years in the wild, and this means you have 5 years of predation on important species like lizards or birds. There are welfare implications for the cat itself. Getting it, once it's been trapped, to a place where it can be neutered can be very stressful for the animal, but also you're then releasing it back into the wild where it's going to have a lot of problems for the next few years of life, where it's still got to hunt for food and it's still got to have a strange territory. It's also got disease implications, where some of these feral cats that are re-released actually have diseases that can spread to other cats. And so you have to be very careful about that. And there's also the property destruction. You release cats again and they're still going to attack pet cats, attack property, and you've got to make sure that that the community are well aware of these things. Next slide. There's a range of live traps that you can use. There's cage traps, there's leg holds. There's all sorts of traps that you can capture your animal live and then either release it after spaying and neutering it or euthanize it afterwards. But of course, there's legal implications for that because you have to then make sure that the euthanasia method you've chosen is allowed on the island. Again, there's those welfare implications when you catch an animal in a cage to then transport it to your area for either euthanasia or spaying and neutering and rehoming. The good thing about these traps is there are a lot of new systems for auto-reporting of captures. Live traps, you must be checking your traps daily. And in some situations, in hot climates, twice a day. So it's very intensive labour requirement for this option. And so the new auto-reporting systems of eco nodes and electronic nodes, which will alert you when your trap has gone off, can speed up this process. But people have to be aware of all those other implications of using those types of traps. Next slide. Of course, then you can move on to the lethal methods. And this can be quite confrontational for a community when they don't want their pet cat put at risk like this. So it's part of that discussion to have about where these devices could be used and how they would be used. So for lethal methods, there's a range. Again, there's kill traps with a range of options. And again, you can use those eco-node auto-reporting of captures to help speed up your process. There's the use of toxins, so different type of poisons. There's secondary poisoning, but again, this has legal implications. It is not allowed in certain locations across the world, where you can use a rodenticide to target rodents and expect cats and other predators to be killed during secondary poisoning when they eat the rats. There's hunting with both human teams, so people going around, but also with dogs. And there's the introduction of viral diseases. But again, it's talking about all of those welfare implications of all of those options with your community and seeing what their view is about all of these. Next slide. It's a really big picture, and most importantly, it's really important to have the community go through this process with you and help you answer all the questions and get all the information that you need to make a clear assessment of what method you want to go through. So it's getting that assessment of the island and those key species that are present. It's engaging with the community and answering any concerns about their own pet cats, but also getting information about how they feel about the options for control or eradication. And that includes how to euthanize animals at the end. It's to make sure you get all the legal approvals. Of course, once all of that's approved and agreed, you actually can undertake your control or eradication operation. And it's really important to talk about and then monitor the recovery of the island ecosystem. People want to know why we went through this process and why it was so important. And so that's really key to understand the recovery of birds and lizards. And as Elsa intimated, that the biosecurity is really important. And it's how to address not getting cats back to the island or how to limit cats coming back by having them spayed and neutered and microchipped so that people can be aware of where their cats are. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It was very interesting. Please do not hesitate to write your questions on the question box. Just to start, one question about the risk, about toxins and disease, etc. Is there any risk of escape this disease on the continent and after a kind of propagation of this disease outside of the islands?
So there is always a risk, and this is why part of your assessment you need to understand why you want to bring that toxin or disease in. So it's a toxin use is lower risk because it's put out in a specific way, and it's only the toxin itself is in the bait. A disease, of course, on the other hand, is could be wider spread, and if it goes into a pet cat and that pet cat is transferred to the continent or to the mainland, then that could become a risk. So this is part of the discussion you have with communities about whether that is an option for that island. And generally on an inhabited island, it's very unusual to introduce a virus or a disease like that, because there is that risk to pet cats. It's generally a technique that is used on an uninhabited island.
Merci beaucoup. Avant de passer la parole à Cyrielle qui a reçu d'autres questions.
Before giving the floor to Cyrielle, who has other questions, are there any specificities?
Does it change everything about the strategy?
No, you still want to basically understand everything about the island's characteristics and what species are present and what risks there are from visitors. You know, some islands, although they are uninhabited, you get either tourism or fishermen coming ashore or researchers who are monitoring things. So you want to make sure the risks are minimized for those people as well. So you are still taking a conversation. If your island is uninhabited but is neighboring a inhabited island, it's very good to talk to that neighboring island and that community so that they understand what's happening on that island, even if they have no significant say per se. It might be a government island, but it's polite to ask the neighbours how they feel about that, because we want to understand the use of the island for that community.
Thank you very much. Cyrielle?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. We have one question regarding this. What size of islands are we talking about, and what is the maximum size of an island where eradication has been achieved? Is there a limitation?
Generally, the limitation comes down to funding and number of people available. So there have been some very significantly large islands that have had cats eradicated on, but those islands were uninhabited. So yeah, I'm trying to think of the mid-level range for an inhabited island off the top of my head, and I can't think of one. But yeah, so I mean, I've worked on islands that were inhabited with cats, and they were between 500 and 1,000 hectares. So, you know, you can go a reasonably large island. There are different strategies, and it's just those conversations with communities. Technically, you know, it becomes more technically difficult with a larger island if you're restricted, if you've got restricted options and control and eradication. That's all.
Si je peux
Oui, bien sûr, vas-y, Elsa.
ajouter, c'est effectivement plus c'est grand, plus c'est difficile.
Yes, I would like to add that the bigger the island, the more difficult the island, because there's problems with cats, but also problems of reintroduction of the cats. So because there's different entrances to the island, so things can happen and cats can be reintroduced. Thank you.
Just mentioned it, but what about
Elizabeth?
And the costs of each of the methods you presented? Is there a most cost-effective method that applies better to one context or another?
It is very difficult to assign costs to an island. It does depend on the island itself. Often the use of toxins is a lower cost overall because it's easier, it's quicker to put out. The use of traps is very labour intensive, so you need to, of course, have a lot of people and the costs go up for that. It does depend on your island size, so there are a lot of factors. This is why it's very important to do an island assessment and get all of these questions answered so that you can then get a very clear budget put together.
Okay, thank you. We do have another question on how do you make a population estimate of feral cats and how do you monitor the success of the program?
That's a very good question. It can be very difficult to get an assessment of what you think your feral cat population is. We've used a lot of camera work and identifying cameras seen on the cameras. We've also used footprint and scat counts and surveys like that. It is always an estimate only, but you can get a very good range of understanding of how many cats you've got and how widespread they are. It is complicated when you're on an island with people and domestic cats, because of course you are often also counting domestic cats. But yeah, you can get a handle on that when you work out your catalogue and discussion with your cat owners on that. And monitoring for your cats afterwards, again, is a little complicated on an island with domestic cats, because of course they're still going to leave droppings and footprints around and show up on your cameras. But again, it's a lot to do with the behaviour of the animal and also the range it's spreading and roaming around the island. So it's a lot of long-term monitoring. It's a lot of IDing of scat. We can also we've done eDNA on cat scats to work out which is related to a domestic and which isn't. And it can be a long process. Generally, on islands we've worked on, we've done a 9,000 hectare island, and it took 2 years to confirm that all cats remaining were only domestics.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question. How do you lure trap shy cats?
That's a very good question. Again, you try everything, basically. So we've used different foodstuffs, we've used different pheromones, we've used what we call a Judas cat in another cage to try and bring it in. It can depend on what type of cage you're using. We've used live traps in some locations with leg hold traps nearby, so that the cat can't see them, whereas when they're actively avoiding a different type of trap, we alter the way we use our leg hold traps, so rather than baiting them, create understanding of where the animals are roaming so that we can use what we call a walkthrough and target them just going through their habitat and not relating it to food at all.
Merci beaucoup. Une question de Grant pour Elsa.
So there's another question for Elsa. So the risk of having sterilized cats on an island is that they are substituted by other sterilized cats. So what are the recommendations for diminishing the impact of sterilized cats? Well, this also was said by Elizabeth. Certainly, domestic cats who are sterilized have less impact than unsterilized cats, but certainly it's very important, for example, to give them proper nutrition so that they don't feel the need to go out and hunt. But it's complicated. For example, using a collar or a small bell that announces the arrival of the cat to praise. But the ideal for the biodiversity of island would be no domestic cats on the island, but this is not very possible. We have to take into account the social part of it, because there's so many people who want to have cats in their homes. So of course they are allowed to have cats. So there is nothing that we can do to avoid people having pets, you know, this is seen as a reduction of personal freedom, and it's really badly seen and badly experienced by the inhabitants of the island. So if we do this, we lose all of the benefits that we gain by explaining what we're trying to do. So we need to avoid the arrival of new cats. This is different than not having cats that are already on the island. So, for example, the other thing we could do is saying you can have one cat, not two cats or three cats, but this is very difficult as well. For example, there is one island where inhabitants are limited to 3 cats per family. So there are certain actions that are more acceptable than others that we can undertake. Possibilities of limiting, this is a lot better than, you know, killing domestic cats in an eradication.
Khalil qui nous demande de préciser qu'au final, comme les chats ne sont pas...
So we also have to say that all the cats that are not originally from the island, you know, this is an important thing. We have to really diminish the responsibility of the cat. The poor cat didn't decide to be on that island. So this is why we have to really spread awareness between humans.
Si juste je peux compléter, effectivement. Hein,
yes, I would like to validate what you just said. It's certainly not the fault of the cats if they are on an island, but if we don't do anything, they are just going to double and double. So we already made a mistake by allowing cats on islands, and if we don't correct it, you know, it's going to be a problem. Of course, we have to be as ethical as possible.
Thank you. We still have
merci.
One is there a risk to capture other animals by the lethal traps?
Yes, there is. Any lethal trap can catch any other animal that is a similar size, and that can get into the trap. And so part of your assessment is to understand what non-target species there are, and then adapt your trapping regime to make sure you minimize risk to any other species.
Okay, very clear. Thank you, Elizabeth. And one last question for you, Elizabeth, and you, Elsa. Can you please give us some example of results on ecological restoration after cat eradication?
Well, one of our islands, Ascension, which is very
one good example and one bad lesson. It could be interesting to have both.
So a good example, Ascension Island, where we eradicated cats from. Within a year, some seabirds came off one of the small rock stacks that was predator free and returned to the main island, which is fantastic, and are breeding much more successfully in higher numbers there. Other islands around the world have similar results, where basically removal of the key predator, and usually in association with all other predators on the island, has had significant increase in lizard populations and bird populations, particularly say through several islands in the Caribbean we've worked on, and that sort of thing. Bad examples generally is when your eradication fails and you still have cats remaining, and so your ecological restoration doesn't happen, or in situations where cats were the only animal targeted and the other predators such as rats or ungulates that remained still created an ecological impact.
Oui, je rajouterais qu'il y a des très bonnes synthèses que je peux donner, hein, si je les ai quelque part dans ma bibliographie.
I have in my bibliography also some information on the success of the repopulation of seabirds in Caribbean island, in Japanese island, and also some bad examples of, for example, reptiles that have been eradicated together with the cats. So, of course, this is possible. It's very important to understand the species that are important to protect, especially trying to target species that have a more efficient speed of reproduction. So, of course, eradication of cats must happen with all the possible precautions. Have you got an example of failure of this project? So, with a negative impact on the island? I don't know any negative examples, but certainly we have advanced very much in Port-Cros, and we've seen that the advantage of being on an island is that, you know, of course, we had explained if there were problems with the eradication of cats to talk to us about it, that if anything would go terribly wrong, we would put the cats back on the island. And this is what we've been talking about with the managers and inhabitants of the island. But of course, we have to know really well the ecosystem behind in order to take the right action. And this is what is important to continue. Of course, the first thing to do is always regulating the predators, not to have catastrophic consequences. So there is one last question. Amen is asking for a question. I think Elizabeth already answered to Amen's question. Merce is also asking about adoption programs, certainly about feral cats or stray cats that can be reintroduced in families through adoption. This is possible. So the necessary steps are, first of all, the veterinary to, of course, check the health state of the cat to avoid the spreading of any diseases which could have catastrophic consequences. And then, of course, sterilization. And after, the only risk is that the cat wants to escape once more into nature. And this could create, again, the cycle of predator-prey. But in reality, there's not so many individual cats that have been adopted, but the cats that have been readopted, you know, we obviously have owners who said, you know, with the food and with all their cuddle, they love domestic life. And so, you know, you can never know whether the cat is going to adapt to family life or keep the behavior of a stray cat or a feral cat. So thank you. Thank you very much. So before concluding, is there anything else you would like to say, Elizabeth or Elsa, on how to reduce invasion on cats on the island? So I think I would like to leave the last word to Elizabeth, who has a lot of experience on the subject matter. My last word, my takeaway is that it's very important to circulate proper information. And if you want more information, please contact me. And don't hesitate, certainly in terms of asking me about my experience. I have so many articles I can recommend. So sometimes it's difficult to find literature, so please do contact me and I will give you all the details. Elizabeth, would you like to say something?
This is a fantastic discussion, and it was great to be part of it. Is the key thing for me is always talk to your community, and both explaining the problems with feral cats and domestic cats and how the interaction is and how best to look after their domestic cats and be responsible pet owners.
Thank you again very, very much, Elizabeth, and have a good end of night from the side of the Earth. Merci à toutes les deux, merci à tous les
Thanks,
participants.
everyone. Thanks to all participants who were numerous. Now we're going to have 2 more episodes coming up. And if you want more details on control and limitation of cats, come next April the 18th to the discussion. And then on April 25, we're going to talk about eradication as a last resort. So thank you everyone for your attention, and I will see you at the next episode in 1 week.
Merci, à la semaine prochaine.
Merci.
Merci.
Thank you
Goodbye
very much.
everyone. Goodbye. Goodbye. Bye bye.